Hi, everybody, and thanks again for joining us today. So here is my first slide, and I think this really sums up something I want to get across. I'm not going to mention it again during the presentation because we're going to be talking mainly about writing. But if you haven't realized by now that on most social media, visuals are very important to grab people's attention, then I hope at least if you learn one thing today, that you will include imagery, video, and visuals with most of your social media posts, because it is so important to have something really punchy that grabs people's attention in the deluge of information we all kind of scroll through every day. So that is, if I could just leave you with that, that would be a job well done. But today we're mostly going to talk about writing. So just remember always, it's a subject for another day, but I think that visuals are so important, and no one is going to read what you write unless you have something that grabs their eye first. So always try and pair your writing with a visual. A little bit about myself. I'm an editor originally, and I suppose now mostly what I do is corporate storytelling for brands, selection of which you can see on the slide there. I also founded the Speak Up Club, which was, I suppose, to help women with public speaking in order to build their confidence as leaders in business, in the community. So basically everything I do is to do with telling a story, be that the brand story in print or digital, or people's stories themselves in meetings and presentations and work and things like that. So what I want you to learn today, apart from that one point about visuals, is we're going to talk a little bit about aligning your social media and business strategy, understanding your audience, building a campaign, basics of good writing, and some stylistic tricks. And we'll try and race through as much of that in as much detail as possible in a sort of half hour, 45 minutes we have here. So one thing about social media is no matter which one you're using, and I think when we're talking about writing, Twitter probably springs to mind as the most written word focus still, is that especially with Twitter, it has that creative limitation on you where you don't have all the words possible. You are restricted by your character limit. So while this places the limitation on you, and this is something that in creativity is really interesting, because the more limitations you have, the more ways you have to work to be creative. And this is what's actually made people produce some really interesting content and creative stuff on social media. And I think sometimes when I look, even through TikTok or something, that you see these people doing, amazing videos with, they're not filmmakers, they're kids or they're social media influencers, but having these limitations, having a small amount of space, having only the possibility to put up a couple of pictures, it makes people think very creatively about how they use that. And so definitely when you're talking about writing well for social media, you have to be very creative about how you use your words if you have a limited amount of words. And even if you have, say, on Instagram, you can write a lot more words, but I think you have to use them very cleverly if you want to get people to read them, because people have just so much coming at them in their feeds these days that we all scroll through, we skim, we're not really reading them, we're not really paying attention. So it does take that something extra to get people to pay attention, and then it takes something more to get people to like it, to retweet it, or to repost it, or to engage with it and comment on it. So you really have to push the boundaries of what you're doing to the limit to really make your content as strong as you possibly can. And sometimes actually having those limits helps you kind of focus on that, because it's like that thing in school, if you were writing an essay and you're not given a title, you can write about anything you want. It's much harder to decide what you're going to write about. So when you have a title given to you by your teacher, it's like, right, you just do that. So putting a limitation on, first of all, actually can be really helpful to push your creativity. So stepping back a bit to look at the bigger picture, what I'd always say is try and build as much foundation before you actually start. So don't just set up an account and go, oh, what will I tweet today? Actually bring it back to your business goals and really start with a plan. So first of all, you have your larger business goals. If you're tweeting, for, or Instagramming or doing LinkedIn for any kind of organization, you have your actual strategy of the business. So it should align with that. You should be looking at what the business wants to put out there, or what your brand wants to put out there, and then thinking about the business or brand strategy, and that should inform your social media strategy. And then again, once you kind of have your social media strategy put together, I think social media planning is really helpful, rather than just kind of going every day, oh God, I'd better do some social media, I'd better send a tweet, or I'd better post something on Instagram. Actually putting a plan together and using a tool like Hootsuite or Buffer or Later or any of those to actually schedule all your posts is a really good idea, because at least then you have consistency, you have things on a theme, you might have different campaigns running, so you can have very cohesive campaigns and have them scheduled at, you can see that you've got a couple of tweets or a couple of posts going out every day. And one of the key things with any social media is consistency. So if you are doing a campaign, you really need to be hitting it every day, every week, coming back to it every month, and making sure that your plan doesn't leave gaps where your campaign isn't rolling out. And then you can also see if there's any gaps where you have no posts that day and that you need to have a post that day, because continuous engagement with social media is what drives it. You can't, and I'm guilty of this myself if I'm busy, but you can't just, put a post out and then not put another post out for a month if you're working on a post or a campaign for a brand. So planning from very top level with your business goals, aligning it with your social media strategy, and then actually having an organized plan of posting is really important. Consistency is really key, and consistency of voice as well. So one thing you want to think about is your tone of voice for your brand as well, that you keep, in line with that. You're not going to, have, say, very casual, jokey tweets if you're a law firm. If you are, trying to be more serious and formal and corporate. So you want to think about how you align your tone of voice with your actual business brand tone of voice as well. So when you think about maybe in terms of putting a campaign together, and that's a really good way to try and actually refine your writing, is even to do an exercise of deciding, let's put a campaign together, because it really focuses how you think about it. So it's a good exercise to go through, even if you don't necessarily have a campaign going on. But if you want to kind of think about a brief for yourself or a message you want to put out there for your brand, then the way you would go about developing that can be very useful. And so one of the main things is that you are doing research on your brand, first of all, and also on your audience. So say you were doing some social media for like Nike, for instance, you might think that one of the sectors they want to kind of target would be teenagers. So you might think about teenagers aged 14 to 19 in Dublin. And then, there's a huge difference between a 14-year-old and a 19-year-old. There's a huge difference between someone who lives in Ballymun and Killiney. So you're trying to think about, what do all of these people that I'm targeting actually have in common? Because you can't speak to everyone, and even within a very small demographic, there's still a lot of differences between those people. So what you really want to do is try and find the commonalities between your audience, something that will really resonate with all of them, even though they're quite different people. So really understanding your audience is key to any form of communication. So you want to know what they want. And when you're brainstorming, a really good way of kind of putting together how you're going to approach your social media posts is this insight, challenge, idea method. So doing your research, and we're kind of skimming through this quickly now, but really, if you are putting together a social media campaign, then this should be a very long stage of your work, and it should be quite involved, and it should really form the foundation of what you do. So it's not something you skim over in practice, but just for the purposes of today, we're not going to spend too much time on it. But so all the research you do into your audience should inform what you are communicating to them. So you want an insight, basically, and your insight is, what is their problem? What is their pain point? What do they need? So if I was thinking about, researching for today, I don't know, a lot of you were working in different types of companies, different types of positions, different levels of seniority. You might be thinking about social media for personal use, for a brand, for your own company, for a company you're working for. So there's a lot of differences between you, but the commonality, the common problem is you want to know how to write punchier, more engaging content for social media. So my insight is that you have this problem, and it's like, right, well, how do I creatively solve this problem? So then that's the challenge. The challenge is to put together a presentation that will help you all with writing better social media. So then my idea is what I actually do to help solve this problem. So when you're looking at your audience, you get an insight, you get a pain point, you get what is their problem, what is their interest, and then your challenge is, how can I pull something together creatively that will help them solve this problem? And then your idea is kind of your solution to that. So another thing to think about then is, when you are posting on social media, in your content, what do you want your audience to know, what you want them to feel, and what you want them to do? So what you want them to know is the information that you want to share. So you might have a new product launch, you might have a special offer, you might have, just to know that your brand exists and some brand recognition. What you want them to feel is appealing to their emotions. So do you want them to feel inspired? Is it something really aspirational that you want them to feel like they really want that product, like a real desire to have it? It's a new must-have trainer. It's, it could be appealing to, like, say, their sense of, I have to get that for my kids. They won't be healthy if they don't have that thing. I would be a good parent if I don't have it. What you want them to do is your call to action. And call to action is really important if you kind of really want to get results on what you're doing. So if you have a link to go to your website to get 20% off, sign up to the newsletter for a 10% discount, something like that is what you actually want them to do. Do you want them to go to your page, buy your product, sign up for an event, etc.? So an example of this with the Speak Up Club, where I would be running workshops to help women with public speaking training, my insight would be that women that I've done workshops with have consistently come back to me saying that one of their major problems is they're sitting in a meeting, they're waiting for their turn to speak, they're getting really nervous about what they want to say, excuse me, and basically they hate speaking up in meetings, and they feel like they are being talked over. They say their idea, people aren't listening. Someone else might say it 5 minutes later, and especially if it's a man, that they get the attention for saying the idea and not the woman who said it originally. So the challenge I have from knowing this about my clients is that I want to make them feel supported, I want to make them feel empowered, and I want them to make them feel confident to actually speak up in meetings. So an idea that could solve this would be a social media campaign where we amplify female voices by agreeing with and echoing what other female co-workers say in meetings, so that if one of my co-workers in a meeting says something and it's a really good idea, I instantly jump in and go, hey, that's a great idea Mary just had. I think it's a great idea to do blah, 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 whatever she said. So you'd use this hashtag then, which is one I came up with, was Be Her Echo. Or you could be like hashtag amplify female voices. So that's kind of just an example of how you work with that insight. You know what a problem is for your audience. Then you try and think about a creative way to solve that problem. And then you come up with an idea that solves the problem. So that can be something that, if you're trying to build a campaign on social, is a really good way to work through it and go about building the campaign. And then you come up with your posts all around that. So it gives you your tagline basically for your campaign, your name of your campaign. And if you are doing a campaign, your tagline and your hashtag should really be the same thing, because it's less confusing, creates less noise, and it just really strengthens your message. So if I was doing a campaign with that idea, then my tagline, my hashtag would be Her Echo, and that would be the name of the campaign. So working through that process can help you arrive at that point where you have a campaign to run. So then you could extrapolate out from that, and what you would do would be to, say, get some people making little videos and say, maybe get some celebrity endorsement, get famous women who are well known for speaking in public to make a little video and say, you know, I'm so and so, I'm on board with the Be Her Echo campaign, support your coworkers, and then you'd post your content with that. So that just shows you, you know, how you can work up to that, and then you have to kind of change that for each medium that you're working with. But if you have a strong idea and a strong message, it should work across different mediums. So you might, you know, for a bigger corporation, be thinking, well, it's not just for social media, it's print, digital, radio, TV, or newsletter, email marketing. And then just on social, bring that down into, well, how do we bring that message through on Facebook? How do we bring it through on Twitter, Snapchat, if anybody even uses that anymore, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok. So whatever you're using, then your message should be strong enough to use it everywhere in different ways, and you tailor it to different mediums. So obviously, you know, a company probably won't be using TikTok, but they might be using LinkedIn, and whatever mediums work for your brand, then you'll tailor it to those. So obviously a Twitter post generally more wordy, generally a little bit more wordplay. Instagram post very focused on the picture, but then people do actually write quite lengthy Instagram captions as well. TikTok is more about the visuals and the filming. So you have to use each way differently, but with a strong message, it's very easy, relatively, to tailor it into what you're going to do for each of those. So a little bit about the writing process then. First of all, I would say good writing, know the rules before you break them. So, you know, you should have good grammar. You should, you know, how to construct a sentence well. You should know how to write nicely. But then when you go onto social media, all of a sudden those rules can go out the window. So know them before you break them, for sure. But yeah, of course, if you're on Twitter and you have a limited character count, I'm going to use an ampersand instead of spelling out and, where I would never do that in a written document because that's just not acceptable. So, you know, you are going to have to change things, but be sure that you know what rule you're breaking and do it cleverly. In some ways, you know, doing a little clever rule breaking can work very well, especially when you're coming into like wordplay and things like that. So another thing then that can be really helpful for kind of just that process of kind of working through your ideas, if you're working on a campaign, is to start a word bank. So this might sound like something primary school kids do, but basically just get a piece of paper, open a document on your computer, and just scribble every word that comes to mind to do with that thing. So this was something that I would have often done, trying to think up, you know, headlines and plugs for the front cover of magazines, because you want things that are going to jump off the shelf, that are going to make someone pick up that magazine and buy it and want to know what's inside. And essentially, writing for social media is very like writing headlines and writing cover plugs for magazines. So you're just trying to get, you know, get someone's attention, get them to pick up your post, get them to pick it up like it's a magazine and want to see what's inside, want to click the link to read maybe what's on your page or whatever. So writing a word bank then can really help you do this, because you just word dump everything out of your brain onto the page and get everything that's possibly to do with it out there. So you see all the words that are to do with it. So say if I was doing it for the Speak Up Club, I would be doing things like empowerment, confidence, public speaking, kind of things that may end up being hashtags on Instagram, where you're allowed, I think, 20 or 30 hashtags. So, you know, all of these words are going to be useful at some point, because if you're doing a campaign, and I'd say it's a really good idea, is if you use Evernote or something like that, or even notes on your iPhone, is to select your best hashtags and then just keep them in a note. And so every time you're posting, you can just paste them, because use up the maximum amount, definitely get the maximum exposure. You know, pick the top hashtags that come up when you're typing them in. If they don't have, you know, if they're way down the list, well, use the ones that are at the top of the list, the ones that are being most searched. And then you can just keep your top hashtags in a little note, paste it in every time you're doing a post. And I think especially on Instagram, a good thing to do is to just, you know, do a return and dot, return, dot, return, dot. So they come a little bit down and they're just pasted in at the end. So they're searchable, SEO will find them, but at the same time, they're not part of your main message. Your main message isn't being clogged up with a load of hashtags. So you can do that on Twitter as well, I think. Just keep them separate, keep them a little bit down from the main message so they're not kind of interfering with it. So this word bank, anyway, what you do when you get all your words together is just, you can group them to see, some things might be verbs, action words to do with it, nouns that are kind of characteristics of the product or the service. And when you get all those together, start looking at words that will really jump out. They're powerful words that are the best words to describe it. And sometimes you'll see little connections between words, and sometimes kind of word plays will make themselves apparent to you, or you might think of a cliche or an idiom that you can use. So I think with cliches is that they're not going to jump out at anyone. We've all heard them before. But if you can do a little word play on a cliche and kind of invert it, then that can actually kind of make someone have a little aha moment. And it makes them do a little bit of work to get it and get the joke. But it can work quite well. And it's worked very well in advertising. So just I want to show you, actually I'm going to skip forward and show you, this was an Economist ad which said great minds like a think as opposed to great minds think alike. So it's kind of getting that message across that, it's a very smart magazine for people who are very well educated. It will give you lots of things to think about, and it's a very smart ad. So using a cliche like that where you can invert it is quite a good way of making a little joke on something. So doing that is really good. Another thing then that can, once you've done your word bank, you have all your words, you mightn't instantly be able to kind of fit them into a punchy headline kind of message. That's okay. Write long. Open, like no one's going to see this. You're just on your desktop or you're scribbling away in your notebook. So just write out everything you kind of really want to say. And if it takes a paragraph, if it takes a page, that's okay. Just keep writing until you've kind of started to refine it, because I think it was Ernest Hemingway that said the first draft of anything is shit. So like, just do your first draft and it can be a few hundred words, whatever. The next thing you have to do is edit it. And really the skill in writing, unless you are super skilled and first draft is good enough to use, editing is the real skill in writing. It's knowing what to leave out, what to take away, how to refine it. So write it long, get everything on the page, and then go, okay, how can I make this punchier? How can I make it more powerful? How can I make it more attention grabbing? And so literally go through your words and go, okay, am I using punchy things here? Am I using the, the most powerful words? Have I said something like I have, we have, you have, where I could have said I've, we've, you've? Have I, contracted everything down to the shortest possible while still making sense? And also, have I, there's things that you can kind of smother things with overly long, wordy ways of saying them. So a lot of times in business, when we're report writing and things like that, people do kind of tend to go for the most kind of overly explanatory ways of putting things. Whereas on social media, we need to go punchy, short, make sense, but the minimum amount of words needed to make sense. So, if anything, like an example of, when I can remember just off the top of my head, is say making a sentence much shorter. Is like if someone says, she gave the baby a kiss. A quicker way to say that is she kissed the baby. So always think about, look at every sentence and go, can I take anything out of this? Can I take anything useless out of it? Is there a shorter way to say it? Is there, a punchier way to say it? Can I use an action verb? Can I take out any kind of word or preposition? So instead of, I hope you are keeping well, hope you're keeping well. You know what I mean? So every sentence, just go over and over it with a fine-tooth comb and make it as short as possible. And then iterate, just keep practicing, keep trying, keep doing different versions. Another thing a lot of companies would use in social media campaigns is A/B testing. So A/B testing is where you have your A option and your B option, and you might put both out, especially if you're doing paid advertising. You would do the two campaigns as a tester with a small, pay for a small amount of paid advertising on them, And then whichever one is actually more successful, then that's where you really put the money behind on the campaign. So you always, you can try 2 options and then see what works, and then put your campaign money behind the one that is showing more engagement and more success. So another great example of really working with something short was this ad for Friends. And I just thought it was very inspirational, because it's not even writing anymore. It's just taking the word. And this was for when the last episode of Friends was on Channel 4, and they happened to show it on a Friday. So it was ends fry, and they literally haven't even written anymore. And I just thought that's a great example of the shortest possible way of doing something and actually having the most impact. And it's going to be very tricky to beat that, but good luck. So another thing about campaign activation is that cohesive messaging. And I talked about it earlier with my example for the Speak Up Club, that your campaign name, your tagline, and your hashtag, if possible, should be the same thing, should be 3 to 5 words, and where you can, start with a verb. It's more dynamic. So a couple of examples of good campaigns there, which got a lot of engagement, were Share a Coke with Coca-Cola, Tweet from the Seat from Charmin, which was encouraging people to, well, I think people do anyway, is sit on the toilet seat and tweet. And then another one that didn't use a verb but was very successful was, and I just wanted to touch on it in terms of kind of a good approach they took, was the Calvin Klein My Calvins campaign, which is very a successful advertising and social campaign for them, because it encouraged people to get engaged, because they're all showing, their way that they wear the jeans, how they use the product, which is great engagement. And it also harked back to an older advertising campaign of theirs in print, which the tagline was "Nothing comes between me and my Calvins." And that was quite a controversial advertising campaign at the time it came out. I think it was Brooke Shields in the 80s. So with the idea being that she didn't wear any underwear under her Calvins, it was that kind of saucy message. So this 2-word hashtag, is loaded with meaning and brings up a lot of resonance and associations with it. So it's a very good example of how a 2-word hashtag can have so many other levels of meaning. And if you can do that in your writing, then that's, really, really clever. And I think a lot of people would often speak about a very famous 6-word short story was one of the best examples of writing ever. And it was a challenge put up to write a short story in 6 words. And the short story was "For sale, baby shoes, never worn." And, if you read that, you just think about, well, why were the baby shoes never worn? What happened? There was some tragedy behind this. And so that's kind of what you're trying to do with your social media writing, is the 6-word short story. And you can use more words, but get as much loaded meaning into as few words as possible, and try and, really refine it down as much as possible. So every iteration of it, shave a few more words off if you can. Try and do something cleverer with the words you're using. Try and load up the words you're using with more meaning. Another great thing to remember when you're writing for social media is, most of you are here probably in terms of selling something on social media, or working for a brand or a product, or trying to get a message across. And it is essentially marketing. So when you're marketing something to someone, sometimes you need to lead with as I said before, what's their problem? We try to lead with what can we do for them? What problem are we fixing for them? So you need to write the benefits, not the features. And a good way of explaining what the difference between benefits and features is this iPod ad. I remember those, blast from the past. And this was a really famous ad because it said 1,000 songs in your pocket. So that was the benefit to you of having an iPod, is that you get to carry around 1,000 songs in your pocket. So that's what it means to you, the customer, the person that has the iPod. But that isn't the feature. The feature of the iPod, if they had gone with writing about the features of the product, would have been "Say hello to iPod, 64 gigabits of storage," which to you would have largely meant nothing. We weren't very savvy about what gigabits were at the time. They probably didn't even have that, I don't know, but they might have had 6 gigabits. But that was the feature, but nobody cares about the feature. They're like, well, what does that mean to me? So tell me what it means to me. Tell your customer or your client or your potential client what you can do for them, what it will mean to them, not what you are, because they're not as interested in what you are. They're more interested in what you can do for them, because we're all selfish people at the end of the day. So would always say, don't be formulaic. A lot of people talk about the horrible, dreaded, overused authenticity word, but it's true. Try and be real. Even if you're working for a brand that is still slightly formal in tone, try and be as human as possible. And so if you're going to use a formula, this one is very good to just go over everything you're thinking of posting. Is it clear? Is it concise? Is it compelling? Is it credible? I'm going to just talk about clear for a minute, because clear can be both using simple language, but it can also be clear to someone who's literally just seeing a tweet of like 100 words, because you're writing it, you work for the company, or it's your company, or you're writing something personal. You know the whole story, but you're trying to distill this story down into a very small social media post. And you need to remember that you've got what they call the curse of knowledge. So when you know everything about a subject, it's very easy to forget that who you're speaking to might not know anything about it. So what you say has to be clear to someone who has literally never heard anything about this subject before. You have to not leave them kind of guessing or vague about it. Now, there's a certain element of you want to maybe leave them guessing enough so that they click through to find out a bit more. You want a little bit of intrigue in your writing where possible, but you also don't want them to be so completely in the dark about it that they won't click through because they're just like, I don't even know what this means. So you want to be clear. As we spoke before, you want to be concise, because you don't have a lot of room and people are busy and there's a lot of tweets and posts and things to read, so they're not going to spend all day reading yours. You want to be compelling because you want to grab their attention. You want to make them click through. You want to make them sign up to your newsletter, whatever you want them to do. And you want to be credible because there's a lot of fake news on the internet. There's a lot of, buy this amazing deal. And you want to not be like, don't use too much hyperbole. Don't be like the best thing or the most amazing, because actually there's lots of amazing things. So be realistic, be credible, be real, be human about it. Don't be too fantastical. So try and make it punchy, but not ridiculously punchy and overly hyperbole led. So then another few little stylistic devices you can use to kind of lift your writing are mainly beginning with A for some reason, but just in terms of kind of little twists you can use to kind of make things seem a little bit funnier when you're writing them, can be alliteration. So let me get this right. So alliteration is when you have the consonant sound at the start of a word. So like Bob bought a box of buckles is lots of B's. So alliteration, it kind of makes it more memorable when you do things like this, because we all kind of like rhyme or song or things that are very kind of, tongue twisters. They're very memorable. And that's because a lot of our, traditionally people would have used the oral tradition of passing down knowledge before the printing press was invented. So, we do kind of read things aloud in our heads. So if something sounds kind of memorable in your head, it sticks in your head a little bit more. So using little devices like this can help kind of grab attention and hook people onto them. Another one is, I don't know if I can pronounce this right, anaphora. So that is when you repeat something at the start. So it's using repetition at the start of a phrase. So like, I came, I saw, I conquered is Julius Caesar's famous one, where he's like, I, or Winston Churchill, we shall fight them on the beaches, we shall fight them on the landing grounds or wherever. It's used a lot in political rousing speeches, and often, again, the rule of 3 comes into this, because three is very effective, that repetition, but more than three just goes on too long. So another one, and this is an example of anaphora as well, where you have actually just the same sound at the start of words, is reduce, reuse, recycle. That kind of phrase, re, is very effective, and it's really stuck in a lot of people's heads because of that. So using these things like can make little catchphrases that really stick in people's heads is really, really good. And this one, another pronunciation conundrum, is anti-metabole, which is basically like saying, using a phrase and then kind of reversing the phrase. So a really famous example of this one is, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So it's just reversing that. And then I'm just going to skip on to parallelism, actually, because it's kind of similar to anti-metabole. So the example on the slide there is parallelism. It's sort of using the same idea in the next sentence. And this is from an ad for a Swiss bank. We like our customers because of their money. They like us because of our honesty. So the bank is saying, you know, we're just being honest about it. We like our customers because they have money. They like us because we're honest about it, or because we're honest in our dealings as well. But it's kind of just using a similar phrase, and it kind of makes, it's not quite a rhyme, but it is that kind of using something, repeating it, that really works and makes it more memorable. And then I skipped over assonance there, and assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds. So basically it's like, I might take a flight. You can hear the kind of rhyming in the sentence. And then we've already spoken about rule of three and rhyme. So any of these things, if you can have a quick punchy little phrase, it will stick in someone's head. And using those devices, sometimes we use them without even realizing it because we're trying to say something or make it sound punchy. So you might not have known the word anti-metabole, but you may actually have used it without even realizing. But looking just at little fun ways of kind of making word plays can be really helpful if you're trying to maybe make a tagline for a campaign or something like that. And so I'd advise you, if you have your word bank, to kind of take those devices and kind of play around with them with your word bank. And it can be quite inspiring to think up maybe taglines for campaigns and things like that. And just to show you a couple of things then that I found interesting, I was looking around for some kind of, it's actually very hard to find examples of great social media content when you're looking for them. So this is something I found last night that made me want to click through. So they've used actually their headline here, and they've put the headline on the link. And I have something I want to tell you why I think this is bad and something why I think it's good. So the example from Elle magazine here has Melissa Broder on hunger, humor, and writing a novel by dictation. So we see that they have used the rule of three, hunger, humor, and writing. They have used a little bit of alliteration in hunger and humor. And then they've used intrigue, because writing a novel by dictation, well, that's unusual. Who does that? I want to click through and see what they're talking about. So that did make me feel like clicking through. But I will say what I don't think is good here is that they have just used the link. And back to my point at the start on using visuals, the link does bring up the visual, but it would be better to use two images there, because I think it was on Twitter that I took that from. You can use, two or three images. So even if you're putting a link, use the actual images, because they take up more real estate on someone's Twitter timeline and they look better. And also because they've literally just repeated the headline, their content of their tweet is doubled up, and that's bad. I think it's better to, have the headline and have really big pictures, and then the link is there, rather than repeating the headline that's visible in the link. So you can take up a bit more real estate by going that extra couple of seconds and actually uploading the images to the tweet, rather than letting the link show the images. And the other one here I want to just go through with you is from Vogue Paris, and it's flicking through their Instagram timeline, and it was feed, and I was like, that's not what I'd expect to see on Vogue Paris, is a plate of spaghetti. So it jarred, because you're expecting, fabulous couture, and all of a sudden it's a plate of pasta. So in one way that kind of works because it's so off-brand that it made me go, huh, what, why? I just want to see some nice dresses. So something quite jarring can work because it makes you click in because it's unusual. And then things that do work about this is, okay, they have their hashtag Vogue recipe book. So if you click on that, you can see all of their posts to do with, recipes, food writers, all of that. And in some ways it is on brand because they're talking about probably quite a fashionable food writer. It's an exclusive preview of a new book, and they've said simple, light, and healthy. So if you're into fashion, you're probably, quite health conscious and figure conscious and want simple, light, and healthy meals. So it does work in an on-brand way when you read it, but also I think it's quite clever in some ways, popping in something, a very plain dish into quite a luscious, extravagant timeline of pictures of pretty fancy clothes and things. So you can do something that's kind of a little bit off-brand, and that jarring effect can almost make someone pay attention because they're like, what's that doing here? But yeah, I do think just to note that like they do have a lot of different hashtags they use, but it is good if you have a few hashtags that will, like that Vogue recipe book, will bring you back to all of their posts with recipes if that's what you want to see. Or they might have another few posts I noticed were Vogue address books, so that would bring you back to all of their posts about cafes, bars, galleries, cool places to go in Paris. So those are really good ideas to have recurring hashtags that will kind of collate a load of information. So for instance, Iconic might have a hashtag with, iconic upskill, and that might bring you to all their tweets that have links to all the like videos online of all the webinars they've done. So moving on to just one last slide, and this is modes of persuasion, and I just wanted to put this in at the end because these words for modes of persuasion are kind of ancient Greek rhetorical words, which don't seem like the most up-to-date thing to talk about when we're talking about writing for social media. But I just thought it was interesting in that it shows really nothing has changed. I'm so interested at the moment. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Clubhouse app, which has just launched recently. It's very much in kind of tester mode and only a very select kind of invite only at the moment, but it is spoken word app. It's a spoken word social media. So it's like listening in on a podcast, but getting to contribute. And it's just showing that things are kind of coming back to the art of rhetoric. I suppose we've moved from writing on social media to making video for social media. And then it's really interesting that these really old words and these really old kind of concepts are still very relevant. So ethos, pathos, and logos, even though they are ancient rhetorical devices, actually very much important in your writing for social media and putting together your campaigns and posts. So ethos emphasizes your credibility, and the modern day version of this would be your celebrity endorsement or testimonial. So as you can see on the slide there, you've got Selena Gomez drinking some Coke. Pathos is an argument that appeals to an audience emotion, so personal story or a powerful image. So, I mean, you think about things like, looking online at, pictures of like kids with distended stomachs in concern ads, it really appeals to our emotions, and we're straight on to text to make a donation. Or in that example there on the slide, you've got a powerful image because it's a very strong image of Selena. She's wearing red. It's a very powerful color. It really stands out in the image. So things like that. And then logos, as opposed to logo, but this is kind of related to logic. So it's an argument that appeals to your audience's sense of logic or reason. So that is like where you're posting, data, facts and figures, percentages. So that can actually be quite a powerful way to post as well, as to really, hit people with a fact. So I just thought it was interesting to end on that note, that some very old devices are still very relevant today. And those three things could be, also jumping off points for starting to think about what you're going to post.